Here we are. Today's event is effective communication with the institution, navigating accommodations. I'm very, very grateful for the space to share this conversation with y'all. I'm framing it as a conversation. I hope that that's all right with everybody involved. We have a simple outline or agenda of items here that I put in this very small slide deck. In putting this event together in conversations with Esme from Cafe, my colleague, um, my intention was to offer practical information, tools and resources, and really have this as a conversational space. So I encourage that. I've provided a general outline of what we will discuss in question or sort of prompt form. And if there are more items that come up, we can discuss those as well. And we have time for each participant or panelist to share, but I will weave through each component, and I encourage, again, a conversational tone. We will do our utmost to answer your questions. If you want to share them in the chat as we go, or save them to the end of the conversation, and we'll have a Q&A portion at the end. I've included, as you see on this slide, a little bit of detail of what each of us do at CGU. And what I'd love to do is just invite our panelists as we go to share additional details, background if you want to share your current roles and projects at CGU if you'd like, and connection to this subject matter as we go. So keeping it a little less a little less formal, but share what you'd like to. And just before we get started, I'd love to do a quick temperature check. Miguel Angel, you know this, you know what it's about. And if you want, Miguel Angel, you can just unmute and share your number. But on a scale of 1 to 10, regarding this event's material and what we'll be addressing, how do you feel? 1 being low, 10 being let's go, I'm so curious about this and I want to be equipped with this information by the end of this hour. Temperature check 1 to 10. Add it to the chat or speak it if you'd like. Yes, Miguel Angel, thank you. 9, 6, wonderful, good. Thank you, Shay. 8, okay. Panelists, you're welcome to also join in. I'm just going to put 10 because let's go. Yeah. Okay, good. Wonderful. Thank you for participating in that. And thank you for being here once again. I'll share my screen again, and then we'll get started officially. Here we are. So very simple agenda here in the form of questions or prompts. What exactly is an accommodations request? We will go over this. Annie will speak to this, and each of us will add to that definition as we go. How does one request accommodations at CGU? What are the requirements for requesting formal accommodations at CGU? How can faculty offer support beyond the formal accommodations process? How can we support learners who may not necessarily have an official diagnosis but can benefit from accommodations? What might a classroom or a syllabus or the overall learning experience look like with equity and accessibility in mind? What does this process look like from the student's perspective? What are some challenges in navigating this process? And that can be addressed from the faculty perspective, from the administrator's perspective, from the student's perspective. And how might students and faculty alike work toward a more equitable and inclusive learning landscape? So that collaborative component is, I think, crucial to address. So just simply in case for the recording back, or in case you don't have access to the video screen, I'll introduce myself, Tamar Salibian. I earned my PhD in 2020 in Media Studies and Cultural Studies. I wrote about reality television and commodification of the self. And then I was invited to teach for TNDY and for Cafe, the core course primarily, ethical pedagogy and pedagogy design and curriculum design. And I'm just really, really, really grateful for this space today. For the video, in case someone doesn't have access to the video, I am a light-skinned woman with brown hair with a little bit of gray in it, and I'm wearing a navy blue shirt with a silver pendant. And my pronouns, you're welcome to use she, her, or they. Okay, I'm going to go back to our slides and then we'll move forward. So, beginning with the nuts and bolts here, right? Like the process. And I just put those reminder questions. What exactly is an accommodations request? How does one request accommodations at CGU? What are the requirements for requesting accommodations at CGU? With our guest speaker, Annie Knox, I will hand the mic and the stage over to Annie. I think Annie also has slides as well. I'm so grateful for your participation today.
Thank you so much for having me. I am Annie Knox. I'm the Dean of Students. I am also the Title IX coordinator and the Disability Services coordinator. So, when you are a CGU student and you need academic accommodations, my office is the one that you come to. So let's just kick off with why we have academic accommodations, and that is to provide equal access to all of our students. We know that all of our students are not coming to us with the same physical and mental status, and that some may need a few extra tools just to ensure fair access to the educational space. Our goal here is to teach content, have students learn content, and then be able to demonstrate their expertise. And in each phase of those, sometimes students just need a little bit extra help. So note that most of what I'm showing is going to be found on the Disability Services website. So just my.cgu.edu/disability services. So that's the concept. It is federally protected under the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act, but also know that when we get to the graduate level, it's different than it is at the K-12 level. At that level, it is the educational institutions, public educational institutions, burden to identify students who need accommodation, help them be assessed, and provide those services. Higher ed is non-compulsory. It's a voluntary activity. It's something that you're choosing. And it is our responsibility to level the playing field, but it is the student's responsibility to self-identify, to submit the appropriate application and paperwork to support their request, and to kind of keep up and be the leader in their accommodation process. So here's our cover page. When you are wanting accommodations for the first time with CGU, you go to our web page and you'll see right here under this panel is a register for accommodations button. When you click that, it takes you to this page. See, it's highlighted on the right. You see where it's red. And now you would fill out for new AIM students. AIM is our accommodation intake management system. You would fill out an application by clicking this button down at the bottom. It will take you into our AIM portal. And this is what the first page looks like of the application. Because I didn't want to fill out a whole new application. This is just the beginning of the application in our system. The application you'll see is 2 steps to register. These are the first 2 steps of your application process. The application itself, which honestly takes less than 5 minutes to fill out. It's mostly demographic information like who you are, what is your student ID number. It is really important that students put in their student ID number. I will look it up if they don't, but like it is a lot of extra steps for me. That number is really important because students change their name a lot on us. I'm just going to be honest that students have new identities that align with new names. They get married, they get divorced. All kinds of different things happen in the span of a graduate experience, and that student ID number never changes. And so that's the way I actually had a student call and give me a name I'd never heard of before and said, I cannot submit an application. Well, the reason they couldn't submit a new application is because they had already submitted an application under a completely different name. So that helps us track. It also helps us build your actual ID for this system, because we have an equation and it involves the last 4 digits of your student ID number. And you'll see that process is so fast. And then you go to submit documentation. This is where the most of our students get held up if they're not expecting it. To help us on the equity side, we are providing different services to students with accommodations than we are to students who don't have accommodation. And to support that and make sure that is equitable, we require documentation from a healthcare provider that says, yes, this student has a diagnosis, and yes, they need accommodation. That helps us ensure that it is fair and equitable for all of our students. So what needs to be this is part of that application. You'll self-identify what you think your general disability is. The ones that are on here are the most general and or common, although deafness and blindness are very rare here. But ADHD and autism spectrum disorder are super high on our list of common themes that students are navigating. And you get an opportunity to kind of think about what accommodations might fit for you. None of that means that like those are the accommodations you will get. It just gives us a jumping off point. Also, what your doctor puts on the letter, we're not limited to that. We're also not bound by it, but generally we go well above and beyond what the doctor says is required. So here's what has to be in the documentation. It needs to be on some sort of professional documentation. This really means no emails. So it needs to be an official, like, aftercare summary. Really, what it ideally would be is a letter from your doctor for the purposes of accommodation. That is not always possible, and when it's not, we work with it. But it needs to be like on medical or hospital paperwork. It needs to include a diagnosis, and a description of limitations. If it's for a temporary accommodation, it needs to have a timeline. So we do temporary and permanent accommodations. A temporary accommodation would be like long haul COVID, I broke my hand, something like that. I have pneumonia. Those are temporary. If there is a diagnosis for which you are forever or chronically treated, then it goes into a permanent accommodation. So once you start an application at all, you will receive an email from us. As soon as we get an application, I respond with what your next steps are. If you've submitted your documentation, the next step is to make an appointment with me. I have a scheduling feature in my signature. It is only for intakes. Every now and then we use it for revisiting accommodations, but it is an accommodation link. So we schedule a 1-hour meeting. For students who have had accommodations and used them in the past, in a graduate setting or in an undergraduate setting, they know what they need and it's very cut and dry. Sometimes that appointment can take 10 or 15 minutes. For students who are first-time accommodation users who have more complicated or unusual medical circumstances, who have multiple things that they're trying to navigate, sometimes those conversations last the full hour. That's why we set it at an hour, because we want to plan for everyone at least having that time if it's needed. In that meeting, I discussed the student experience in 3 parts: preparing for class, attending for class, and being assessed on your learning. So that's reading and homework, how you get through class, and exams. Exams and assignments. So we talk through all of the things. We have different kinds of accommodations. We have things like assistive technology. So for students with any sort of um, reading and processing disability, ADHD, um, sometimes visual impairment, we have assistive technology like Speechify that is a text to speech um, app for students who have maybe a harder time with consistent focus during a 3-hour lecture and or some sort of issue that requires them to take breaks on a more regular basis than the class offers. We have some assistive technology for note-taking services. Um, it's called Messenger Pigeon. It A, creates a transcript of the class, and B, you can then submit that transcript for human taken notes. We actually pay for the souped up version. They are not AI generated notes. They're taken by a human being in that field. So that's assistive technology. We have some others that are based on how much time you need to demonstrate a learning. So for exams, you might need a little bit extra time. You might need on assignments, you might need a little extra time sometimes to complete an assignment. And that one is the only accommodation I find at all presents any sort of danger for students because it has the opportunity to turn into a snowball if it's not well monitored. Usually classes are paced very intentionally, so students are not overwhelmed with work. Faculty are intentional. But if you get behind, the rest of the class doesn't, the rest of your syllabus doesn't automatically bump out also. You have to catch up at some point. So I do find that students that are using that flexibility and assignment due date frequently, and particularly at the start of term, really get into a lot of trouble. So in addition to assigning accommodations in that meeting, we do a lot of conversation and counseling about how to use them wisely. And non like official accommodation techniques and tools that the student can use. It's like you don't just swing a hammer willy-nilly. Like you have a target and a goal in swinging the hammer. Accommodations are the same. Um, so once we agree on all the accommodations in that meeting, I send out the first batch of accommodation letters on the spot. Um, I don't do intakes generally until students are registered. Sometimes with a brand new student, we'll do it in advance. But it's more helpful if a student has already registered because then we can just go ahead and get those letters sent. Student gets a copy, faculty get a copy, same letter. So everybody is on the same page of what's going on. Students and faculty are partners in implementation for a lot of these. Text to speech, faculty don't need to do a thing. That's not a faculty thing they need to worry about. But if there's any sort of change in how the class services are provided, so due dates, when and where and how exams are given, anything like that, the faculty absolutely needs to be a partner in that. And that puts the onus of communication on the student. The student is the leader in saying, hey, this is what I need. Accommodations are not retroactive. So you can't get an accommodation letter at the end of a term and then that says like flexibility and assignment due date, and then expect that your faculty member will be like, well, the 10 assignments you haven't turned in, I guess there will be no docking points. Like you have to have the letter before you use the accommodation. So I really encourage students like ask for the letter before the class starts, ask for accommodations at the beginning of your program. I see a shocking number of students for the first time after coursework is completed as they are preparing for qualifying exams, which is, I know, surprising. and a less shocking amount around midterms and around finals. I just responded to one this morning about a student who was a little slow getting his letter out, and he has an exam in 6 days. And he was like, can I still use it? And I'm like, yeah, your exam is 6 days from now, not 6 days ago. So yes, you're still in that safe zone. Um, so after the first round, students are responsible for requesting letters for the following terms. I send out reminders around the time of registration that says, hey, here's a reminder. Here's how you sign into the system. I expect most of my students sign into the system sometimes 2 or 3 times a year. And so I expect that you probably will have forgotten your sign-in name, forgotten how to do things, and that's fine. Those instructions are in the email. Um, but I have hundreds of students that I'm managing. I don't manually go in and be like, hey, I wonder what this student needs this semester. I wonder if they want me to send letters to all of their professors, because there's a lot of freedom in the system for students to decide what letters go out and what accommodations are covered in those letters. I say what is possible, and then students implement. Um, so when students generally reach out to me again, I didn't put this in there, if you're having any problem with the system. So sometimes I have students that are like, I know you sent the instructions, I still can't figure this out. Fine, whatever, we'll work it out. If there's any issue with a professor and using the accommodation, this happens very rarely. Our professors are super amazing for the most part at respecting accommodations and doing their best effort to meet them. Usually, when we have issues, it is not intentional issues, it is lack of communication on one or both parts, lack of understanding of how, but not an intentional, like, I'm not going to do this. Very rarely does that happen. Sometimes we do need to remind faculty of other areas where they need to accommodate, such as captioning, things like that. That should be a non-issue moving by the end of this year, as we're implementing a whole bunch of technical oversight for that that will make it less on the faculty to oversee their own stuff. We'll have a secondary source of technology to catch anything that faculty don't. Modifications of accommodations, sometimes a certain accommodation doesn't work quite right and we need to do something different. Sometimes we have students who have new or changing issue, like statuses with their bodies. And so we modify based on that. And then post coursework accommodations, those don't go through the system. Those are a one-on-one conversation with me on, like, every unit has different exams. Every unit for doctoral study has qualifying exams, but every single one looks different. Some are take home written, some are articles, some are written and then oral, some are only oral. And so every accommodation looks different and has to be negotiated with a committee to make sure that the accommodation aligns or does not circumvent the learning objectives. Um, and that is the process. So, do y'all have
Quick
any questions?
Quick question, Annie. So Shay had asked a question in the chat that you answered as we were going. New letter of accommodation for each semester. I wanted
Mhm.
to confirm, does that mean that the student needs to reach out to their doctor and receive a new
Nope.
actual letter from the doctor? Good. Thank
Nope.
you for
No.
clarifying that.
So once you're approved for accommodations with me, as long as it's not a temporary accommodation with like a set boundary, which honestly is very rare. It's for things like broken bones, honestly. Um, I haven't had any other circumstances besides those. Um, like your medical documentation, unless you have new situations, your documentation is good forever. You're just requesting, you're not renewing your accommodations. You're just requesting letters go out for your new classes. Um, and even if you have the same professor for three different classes, you want three different letters legally. I mean, technically, yeah, the professor is going to theoretically know, but you want to remind them in each class, like, yep, I am in this class. I still have these accommodations. So I'm going to use Jess as an example because she's here and a big source of my business. She sends me a lot of clients, which is amazing. Um, she teaches a series with a lot of students in it, and it has 4 parts over the year. If you are one student with academic accommodations, Jess should receive 4 letters for you over the course of the year. Some students are like, but I sent Jess a letter last year. She knows what my accommodations are. And I'm like, Jess has 100 students in her class. She's not memorizing your accommodations. I mean, it might be an Aaron Brockovich thing where like she has memorized everybody's accommodations, but that's not a reasonable expectation. The system is 1 letter per class. Um, I send it to the professor of record. So that is important to note. If you have TAs and they don't seem to be, or co-facilitators that are not professors of record, that you think like, they should know this, that's a good conversation to have with a faculty member about like, hey, I wonder if my TA has my accommodations. Um, could you share it with them? That needs to be expressed and asked by the student because professors aren't naturally going to do that because they're scared of FERPA and HIPAA. But if that's something that you want your TAs to know, that's something that a student should request of like, hey, can my whole academic team see this letter?
One more quick question, Annie, and then Shay, I see your hand. Thank you. For the actual letter from the medical practitioner, can
Mhm.
it be an electronic request to the practitioner and
Totally.
delivered electronically? But
Yep.
we just want to check it doesn't have to be an official paper letter. I know we're not in that age anymore. Everything's electronic.
Oh, no, no. They'll all be uploaded into electronically. It just needs to be something with official letterhead that couldn't be faked. Like an email is so easily mimicked. So it needs to have like actual contact information for the medical care provider, just in case we got audited. I mean, I trust our students and also like trust but verify.
Yep, absolutely. Shay, go ahead.
uh, Piggybacking on what you just said, so I I have a letter from a doctor, but what you are describing is maybe wanting more, and I have a specialist also that might know more. Do you need it from both parties, or does a so because my regular doctor is busy, is let's just say, and so did not give a lot of info, even though I emphasized
Mhm.
how much I needed. So they gave me
Yeah.
a generic two-liner. So would that be suffice, or do I need to go and do more uh, hand holding?
So that's probably a case where you shoot me an email at the end of this and be like, here's my letter. Do I need my specialist to give you more? I know what it's like to work with doctors. I do. I am not going to communicate directly with your doctor. I have been asked, like, can you just call my doctor? No, no, that is not my business. And that involves so many releases. It is so much easier for you to communicate with your doctor, and that is your responsibility. But I also know that, like, there are certain medical groups, there are certain like, the VA takes a super long time. I know Kaiser is really tricky to navigate there, and some doctors just aren't going to respond in a timely manner. I understand. So I will work with you and make it as painless as possible. I will only ask for additional documentation if I absolutely need it. Um, if you have a diagnosis on there, that's a minimum for us to start having a conversation about what you need.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll talk. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Great.
I think what's really great, Annie, you pointed to this throughout this first presentation component, the agency that our scholars or students, whichever you prefer, I prefer scholars,
Yeah.
have in this process, right? That agency, you take charge, and also it's still a collaboration, right? Like
Yeah.
faculty, administrators, we're here with you, and we want you to thrive and to get what you need. Like, otherwise, what's the point? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think that takes me, let's move to speaking a little bit with Jessica. I'll share my screen real quick just as a refresher of maybe some questions to think about. As far as faculty support, how can faculty support beyond the formal process? Of course, we will also talk about maybe the formal process too, like how can faculty be really on top of things? How can we support learners who may not have an official diagnosis but can benefit from accommodations? And what might the classroom, the syllabus, or the learning experience look like with equity and accessibility in mind? Jess, please share. Tell us, tell us.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm Jessica Diaz. My pronouns are she, her, and I am an assistant professor in the Division of Organizational and Behavioral Sciences. And I'm also the chair of our PsyD program, which is the Applied Doctorate Program in Organizational Psych. As Annie mentioned, I teach the first year statistics sequence, which is a year-long course, well, 4 courses put together over the course of a year. That means that I have the pleasure of teaching every first year student in Division of Behavior and Organizational Sciences, regardless of concentration. Yep, I had 100 at the beginning of the year. And I do know everybody's accommodations Annie Knox, even though I have 100. But that is probably because I come from a background of educational equity and access. And so it's a personal passion of mine to ensure that the classroom is accessible and inclusive for everybody. Yes, I had Miguel. I miss him greatly. So that I think would come without this process. But I think the thing that I want to echo the most is sort of what Tamar and Annie were talking about in terms of it being a partnership and a communication. So I love when students come to me before those accommodation letters even go out and say, hey, this is what I need to be successful. I teach with principals in my classrooms, and one of my principles is advocacy. And I think that that's important anywhere, but it's really important at CGU. I think at a graduate-only institution, we really expect students to advocate for what they need in the classroom. And what I find is that when students are proactive about doing that, professors are really amenable to providing the supports that are needed. So I always say to my students, like having gone through grad school also, like I had 2 kids over the course of my grad school experience. I almost lost my dad. I had a lot of life, as I say, right? And lives for our students in really major ways. Um, and so it's not uncommon, like thinking beyond the formal accommodation process. The best thing that I always say to my students is like, just be proactive about communicating with me. I have like only 4 rules in my like expectations in my classroom, and one of them is, the emoji that goes like this, right? My one of my 4 expectations is like, don't make Jess go that emoji, right? That's it. Like I can handle any needs that students have. I can be flexible in terms of deadlines or accommodations or, hey, my mom is sick and I need to take her to the doctor. Okay, fine. We'll figure out how you, right? Like you are a human first and then a grad student, but where students really struggle, to Annie's point, is when I'm left doing this after the fact. So, like, where is that person's DA that was due today? Or why haven't I heard anything about XYZ? Or you're not in class. Believe it or not, people think in a classroom of 100 that I don't notice. I know exactly who's not there, and they all get an email from me right afterwards. Hey, I missed you, right? And they're like, what? Yeah, I notice who's not there. And I don't care. Like, there may be a day you have to miss class, but what I do care about is that students are really proactive with me because otherwise I'm not in a position of being able to support them. So I think it's always when you're thinking about beyond the formal accommodation process, it's important to like be proactive with your professors about that. And like I said, at CGU, most professors are really good about saying like, sure, we'll figure out a way to make it work. We all have lives outside of school also, and we're used to working with graduate students where, like, I mean, I have 100 different life circumstances in my stats class, right? Some are very simple. I'm straight out of undergrad. I live on campus. I'm here all the time. Very simple. And some are very, very complex. And so I think like don't be shy in having those conversations with professors up front. Um, and I think the other thing Annie said was this idea of like sometimes professors don't know. So I think there's a an interesting um, boundary that can be important to navigate between this is something that I know that I need, and this professor has a way that they've structured their course. And so that I think is where formal accommodations can be really helpful, right? So for example, like I need to be online because I received this medication and I cannot be in person, right? If a professor's teaching an online class, it's a lot to say, "Hey, could I go on," or an in-person class. It's a lot to say, "Hey, could I go online?" From an equity standpoint, that professor's like, well, if I let you do it, then I have to let everybody do it. And that's where the formal accommodations become very, very helpful. So for general one-off accommodations that people need in my class, I give them. But what I will always say is like, if this is going to be something that you need more than just tomorrow, right, then you need to go talk to Annie. And I usually frame it as an equity issue because I do have to offer, like I feel a responsibility to offer that accommodation to everybody unless I know that this is specifically the accommodation that you need, and that Annie has sent me that letter. Um, I will say, like I said, I usually know what those are before those letters go out. Um, and like Annie said this already, but the only time that it gets students in trouble is when it's a flexible deadlines piece and then people get behind. So I think particularly in like stats, which moves very, very quickly, um, getting behind on one isn't about like, oh, I'm upset that you're late. It's like you're going to be in hot water soon if you can't catch up. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly simple adult professional stuff, like be proactive in your communication with professors. People are really flexible. If you encounter a barrier, I would say this is, I don't know if I should this recorded, but if you encounter a barrier, right? I think like think about whether the thing that you're asking for is something that you really need. And if it is, then Annie's a good person to bounce that off of, right? Because I don't, like Annie said, I don't always think it's a professor trying to say, no, I don't want to do that. But you are not obliged to disclose anything personal to a professor about what's going on. And so if you say, hey, can I have this particular accommodation? And you know there's a reason, and the professor's like, no, and you don't want to share that, you're not responsible for it. That's what Annie's there for, right? You share that with Annie, and then Annie just says to us, hey, this is what this person needs, and then we're obliged to kind of ensure that that happens for you. So that's kind of my big picture thought on accommodations. I often get students, I think, who I have to refer to Annie because they know that I'm really accommodating. And so I'm like, okay, yes, but if you're going to do this every time, then you got to go to Annie because it's an equity thing. So I think having it on paper, having it documented is really, really important. And then I think in terms of like just classroom inclusion and accommodation, the like we talked about before, some of us are really tuned into this, but I've been doing educational equity work for almost 20 years, right? And I don't expect all professors to have been doing educational equity or pedagogy work for 20 years. That's not a common professor background. And so there are a lot of tools that are helpful for students that professors don't know about. And my suggestion is to share those with your professors, right? So to say things like, hey, I mean, I have a great example. Like, I have a student who is like, I'm colorblind. Can you not make lines red? And I was like, yeah, totally. I won't make lines red. Easy, right? She could have sat there the whole year and never asked me to change the color of my red lines, right? And gotten her friends all the time to say, hey, that line is red, right? But it was a really easy thing to just ask and a really easy thing for me to do, and I wouldn't have thought about it. So I think those types of things, or hey, I want to turn on closed captioning, or I have a student who takes pictures of things because he wants to be able to look at them really closely. I think when students are proactive about the solution to the challenge, is when most professors are really kind of amenable to making accommodations. It's when students, I think, are like, I can't, like, it's you on your end, it's us figuring out how to support you. And on your end, it's you figuring out what do you need to still meet the expectations, right? Because I'm going to hold those same expectations for all students. And we're both coming at it from opposite ends, being like, okay, how are we going to help this person meet those expectations? As long as that's the kind of philosophical approach that folks are taking, then I think most students will find that it's a pretty simple process at CGU.
I want to take a moment here to underscore the proactive component here, right? To be proactive. Also, that element of agency, right? And I think with accommodations, with health or all different types of health requirements and circumstances, sometimes stigma comes into play. Sometimes, "Oh, I don't want to, I don't want to put anyone out of their, put anyone out kind of thing, as whether it's a professor or your colleagues in the class. But this is where I think the accommodation process, the formal one, as well as staying transparent and communicative with your with the office as well as with your faculty, it gives it a shape so that you can actually ask for what you need and you can get what you need and really continue to thrive as a scholar. And I wanted to pass the mic here to Taryn. I'm going to share my screen for really
Can I say
quickly.
one thing really quickly before
Of
I have to
course.
jump? The other thing that I have encountered a lot is I have students who have needs outside of school, right? Maybe they see a therapist or they have a doctor who supports them. And for some reason, they think that that's going to stay outside of school, right? So I have students who, like 3 to 4 months in, are like, I'm struggling. And I'm like, all right, tell me a little bit more about that. And they talk to me and they're like, yeah, I'm dealing with it in this space outside of school, right? And I'm like, if it's in your life, it's going to be at school, right? And so the other thing I would say is like, get those accommodations, even if you think you'll never use them, right? Like I have a student who has accommodations in my course, which includes extra time on an exam. She never takes extra time on an exam. And in fact, she asked me, can I just take it in the room with everybody else? And I said, you now have the latitude to do whichever you want, right? But I think where people get, I see this a lot where I'm sending, like Annie said, she gets people right before midterms. It's because people come to me really panicked before midterms and they're like, I get really bad anxiety. And I'm like, do you have support for that outside of school? And they're like, yes, I've been seeing somebody for years. And I'm like, great, go file an accommodation. But people wait because they're somehow, I think part of it's stigma, part of it's like what the root of that support is. But this idea that like somehow it's going to be different here is, I think, a misnomer. And I would encourage people like, if you think you're going to benefit from them, at least have them at your disposal so you're not kind of rushing at the last minute.
Yep, 100%. Jess, this speaks to a larger conversation that maybe we'll have at another webinar in the future. Esme, let's take note, which is that we try to silo and compartmentalize our personal and our professional and our academic lives. And I've said this, Taryn and Miguel Angel, Miguel Angel hasn't heard it yet, but Taryn, you may have heard it in a previous semester. Like doing a PhD or doing a master's degree isn't just about, oh, I delivered this document and that's it, right? It changes you, it challenges you, you challenge the institution and you challenge ideas, right? And so it's just really crucial to stay aware and keep, bring these pieces together because they're not separate, as Jess said. Thank you, Jess. I'm so grateful for you
Speaking
being.
of student meetings, I have one, so I have to run. But good to see you, those of you I know. Nice to meet everybody else. I think Tamara's going to share my contact information at the end of this, and anybody's welcome to reach out if they have questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Jess. Okay, so Taryn, real quick here. So, a student's perspective, a scholar's perspective, right? What does this process look like? What are some challenges in navigating this process? How might students and faculty alike work toward a more equitable and inclusive learning landscape, which we've been talking about throughout this hour? And I would love to hear from you. It's all yours.
No, thank you so much. I know we're kind of running low on time, so I kind of just wanted us to also have time for if anybody had any questions. So really quickly, my perspective and my experience, I grew up, and I have many disabilities that are invisible, and I grew up within the Hispanic culture, our value is linked to our ability to produce and to provide. So if we're not being productive or we're not working through or on something, then we're missing the mark, right? And so that really kind of impacted me going, especially getting accommodations later on. And so I did my undergrad and I did my master's without any accommodations. And it wasn't until during my master's I when I was able to complete a critical disability study portfolio. And it was through that where I really understood that like all of my experiences growing up of where I felt frustrated and I felt isolated and I felt like just kind of like, why does my brain work like this? And why do I always have to go the extra mile to get things done? When my classmates maybe spend an hour like reading something, it takes me twice as long, right? And so and and I really during my master's as well, I really struggled with that. I really struggled with my sense of worth, my disability identity. There's a lot of stigma that we also like brought up here too. And so for professors, students coming in, we have our different histories that may not always come to the surface when we're talking about things or that don't always come easily for us. And so one of the things I wanted to just bring up bring up quickly is that I wanted to add to what was kind of talking about earlier. And it's and one of my top tips for professors is really kind of engaging in a foundational mindset shift, right? I want you to maybe ask yourself, like, can you tell the difference between accommodation and accessibility? Right? A lot of our accommodations model really depends on evasions of privacy to work, right? And this accommodations requires us with a disability to talk to the professor, to talk to our employer, and to ask for something extra. And really, often we have to prove that we deserve this accommodation in the first place and that I am disabled enough to get these worths. And so when professors are able to um, incorporate universal design or like ungrading principles or more flexibility within their course design, I can't tell you how much that makes an impact because when I was in my master's and I was going through that really difficult time, my professors did the ungrading. I was able to have all these accommodations that now I have formally requested, and it gave me the confidence and actually a little bit more time financially to pay for to get this done as well. But I feel like accessibility and access really it means that these accommodations are already integrated into the space, right? They're not just for one in particular individual, but rather for everybody. And it goes back into this what I feel that everyone has access needs, right? We've spoken about it, right? And one of the things that we talk a lot about in disability studies is the curbside effect, right? When you go walking on the streets and you see the curbsides, um, those little levels with the little gradients so you could go up on top of the sidewalk, that helps so many different people, not just one particular subset, but so many different people. And that creates for me this notion of shared responsibility. So that burden of having to prove of that I have a disability that it's shared by everybody, right? Access should be for everybody, not just for a subset of people, right? And one of my biggest things for professors and for anybody really is to really delve into the cultures of disability, right? Really bring it inside your home, right? Outside of this is just a course design, these are practices that you could implement in everyday life, right? You can have grace and you can have understanding, like things like audiobooks. That was something back in the way back, right? Audiobooks were for those who couldn't read, right? For those who didn't who had blindness, but now they're widely accessible, like lowering the price, and it became a norm. And that is what these practices, I hope, that professors want to adopt, is not only will these practices help your students, but what we do in our classrooms is practice of what we do outside in the world, right? These are spaces that we can practice these things in an environment with non-judgment, right? Um, I'm going to share a resource in the thing that I have been working on, and that sprung to me from a disability conference that I did, and they did like a disability equity resource page. So sorry, it's 12:57. I will also send in the chat this. Let me share it really quickly. And this is a resource for students specifically. So this is how I broke down my when you're meeting with professors. Sorry, really quickly. Share with others. And they could open the link. Perfect. Um, the first one, it it lays out like the subject and all these different types of resources that you can go to, videos, documentaries, article series, webinars, a lot of things that you can just gain more knowledge and exposure to in different the world of disability. And when you and I love collecting resources. So if you have any resources that either helps your craft, or that you're like, oh man, this really changed my perspective on this, or like, oh man, I had no idea how like what colors I should input, that or that would be helpful for those who experience color blindness, then this is something that send them to me, comment, and I will add you so you can add your own resources to it. Um, and my other one, really quickly for the students, I've had general tips, something that we've already kind of really spoken about. I really suggest keep a record of everything. I come from Texas, and unfortunately, the accommodation process is not as forgiving over here. Every single semester, students had to prove with medical documentation, updated medical documentation, for them to get accommodations. It's not like that here, and thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. But yes, record everything. This can really help. One of the things I normally do, and you'll see within the paper, is that within the document, is that whenever I talk to professors about any of my accommodations, I send a follow-up. I send a follow-up email, so just to get on the same basis, like this is the agreement, we've come together, we collaborated, because really it's a win-win for both of us, right? You're accommodating my access needs, and plus on the professor side, this can be a learning experience too, to really implement some of these things into your everyday practice, like including and enabling captions everywhere, and making sure that your videos have captions. And if they don't, then you could contact Annie and then be like, hey, there's these resources for you, you know? So, but there's so many, we have people around us that are willing to help, and we have community. And so just know that you're not alone. This process can be so frustrating. And I can't tell you, every time I go into one of these meetings to even discuss my accommodations, that I'm nervous. Even though I've done it a lot of times, I'm always nervous about how professors are going to react, right? But just know that you're not alone, and there's people behind you, like Annie and other professionals and other professors and students that will be there and to support you. Mhm.
Taryn, thank you so much for these resources, and thank you for sharing part of your experience. I want to put in the chat some contact information here, and if you can stay Why is this so small? Okay. If you can stay to ask questions, I'll stay on for a couple minutes. But you also have ways to reach us by email in the chat. Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Taryn. And we also are thanking Jess, who had to depart a little bit early. This was wonderful. Any questions before we close out for today? Okay. I see Shay typing. I just want to make sure. Excellent. Thank you for your comment in the chat, Shay. This was wonderful. Savvy joined us, which means she was comfortable listening to all of us, and that means something too. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out and keep advocating for yourselves and for your colleagues and your community. Taryn, I really appreciate you pointing to community, and we all did in different ways throughout this conversation. I wish you a wonderful weekend. Rest as much as you can if it is available to you. And we'll see you next time. Yes? Thank you so much.